Good morning, students. I hope you're all doing very well. Some of you might remember yesterday I conducted a class on the First World War. That was my first class of global history. Today I am going to continue with global history, except that First World War is done. So today I will actually be discussing the Second World War. I was actually planning to take a single class on these two seminal events, but then the first class, the PPT which I prepared, it actually became pretty large because for obvious reasons there's so much to cover. It's not just in one isolation, and also there's so much of an impact. So that is why I took a class on the First World War, and now of course today I'm gonna take a class on the Second World War, right? And of course the Second World War probably has had an even greater importance when it comes to our national as well as international present day position, because a lot is owed to what happened back then. The Second World War in many ways shaped us that even the First World War could not. I was just checking out my direction of the logo. First of all, first things first, let us understand what Unacademy stands for. So welcome everybody to Unacademy's YouTube channel. The name of our channel is known as Let's Crack Management Exams, and I of course will be helping you with the subject of general awareness, and me along with all the other teachers will help you reach your dream colleges within the broad framework of management education. CAT, of course, is the flagship program, flagship exam. We also have preparation for examinations such as SNAP, ZAT, TIS, MAT, CMAT, etc. Right? So that's pretty much it. Let's just work out a brief profile of myself. This is myself. You can see my name is Aritro Dasgupta, and I've been working for more than a decade. So I finished my MBA back in the year 2010. Since then, I have been working continuously for more than a decade. What are the areas that I've worked in? Let me just show that to you as well. During this period, I have worked in the areas of teaching. That, of course, you can see, and I have been teaching in colleges and coaching for quite a while. Training as well, because I have taken a lot of one-off sessions with several colleges and schools where I visit for a day or so, and I train students, motivate them, as a motivational speaker, as well as I train them for soft skills. Also teaching training, there's also strategy consulting. I've got a few clients in this regard. Executive recruitment, which is basically the top level of recruitment. And also finally, I'm also into content writing, where I have several publications in my name, and there are some regular publishers as well for whom I contribute content. Right, moving ahead, my experience has predominantly been in India, but I've also worked in the Middle East and been published in the US. And the last 5.5 years, I have been engaged with the coaching segment. And during this period, I have trained quite a few of the country's top students, rank holders to several national level examinations have been my students. Examinations such as CAT, CLAT, and DUJAT, I'm talking about. So, what all you will receive as part of the Unacademy platform, let me tell you. First of all, there are daily live classes. So, every day there are a dozen classes at least on the online platform. And in particular, we also have many classes for the management program. And within that, we also have our channel, Let's Crack Management Exams. So, I have a team, we are 6 or 7 faculty. So, we all take classes on a rotational basis. So, even if I do not have, the others would be having, and even I do to conduct classes on an almost regular basis, right? Our course content is very well structured from the head office itself. You can see this. So in any course content, the most important thing is the pedagogy set that is done in our case from the head office, which is in Bengaluru. We individual educators, of course, in addition, further add value to this. I never keep tiring of saying this, that Unacademy is like the Netflix of education. Once you are enrolled and you've paid a fixed fee, you can take n number of sessions. So even if you've missed out a live session, no problem. We always have recordings of these. So that is something you can go through the archives. That's just search for our channel, Let's Crack Management Exams. So that channel you will find on YouTube. Besides this, we also believe that even if you cannot attend a live class, for that you should not be penalized, which is why you can basically go through classes anytime, anywhere you want. We also have a lot of live quizzes. Live quizzes can be two types. One could be for those who are enrolled. We have full length mocks, and those who are yet to do so, they can go for the national scholarship test, which is being held every Sunday. Lots of goodies on offer as well for that. Apart from this, there are also a lot of quizzes I ask on the spot itself. So you can see the YouTube live chat window on the right hand side. So वहीं पे उसको मैं यूज करके आपसे सवाल पूछता रहता हूँ. Right? This is a list of some of our key educators. You can take a look at their names. So these are some of the names of our star trainers. You can take a look at the names, their work experience, qualifications, as well as the number of followers and shall we say watch minutes they all have under their clock. And I'm also on the verge because I'm doing pretty well in terms of rankings on the unacademy.com platform. So very soon I should also be having a pretty decent ranking. Right? You can see the names. This is some more names, but this is also to tell you how you receive notifications for the different classes. Meanwhile, this is how you receive notifications for the batches. There are two kinds of batches. One is for the entire course, and that obviously includes a number of trainers. The other is when only a single subject is taken into consideration. Like you can see at the bottom of this page, Shukla ji's English classes, right? So him alone will be taking these classes. That's a full-fledged batch with him. I had also launched a plus batch, so in my last month's archives you can go through that as well. That should be pretty useful. Right. So what all advantages you receive out of Unacademy? Let me show that to you guys. First of all, there's a schedule that works ideally for the student. Even if you cannot attend a live class, no problem. You can always access it later. All you need is your mobile PC or tablet for this. There's also no language barrier because we've always believed that language should not withhold a student's, right to study. So that is why we are present in 16 different languages, as you can see here. I'll turn on the highlighter. So you can see there are four languages mentioned, and in addition, we have 12 more. So 12 plus 4 is 16. You may also interact with your educator anytime to get your doubts cleared. And of course, there are live polls as well. The live polls works especially well on unacademy.com. So do attend some of my sessions on unacademy.com as well. Now, we also have live tests and quizzes, which have the full syllabus, as I told you, depending on the latest format. After each test, you actually receive a detailed report and analysis of the same so that you know which exam and which question you can actually look at. There are also detailed PDFs and learning material for the students, right? So this class, for example, the one I'm taking today, it does have a very detailed PPT. So do save that, and later on we can have, you can always learn on your own some other time as well. Right. So there, as I told you, there are PDFs. This is probably the most important slide because this contains my code AD09. So once you incorporate that code, you will receive a flat 10% off. आप देख सकते हैं हर जगह लिखा है 10% का छूट. मैं चाहता हूँ आप ये दोनों साइड देखने की जरूरत नहीं है because they basically highlight the same thing except that their emphasis is separate. But I want you to read each and every line otherwise, because that will give you an idea of how things work. एक बार आप देख लीजिए. where I will discuss on a couple of matters. Right? I suppose you have gone through all of this. Right? I'm pretty sure you have gone through all of this. So, on that note, let me now begin with the actual class. But just to highlight you guys, you will notice that if you take up the 1 month course, you end up paying 3150 per month. But if you take the long term courses, which is either 2 years or 1 year, you only pay rupees 788 per month or 1313 per month. Only one of the two. So, this for me is far more beneficial. Right. So on that note, let's move ahead. I'm assuming everybody's got a fair idea of how an academy works. So I'm now going to begin with the actual class. So continuing from yesterday, I'm going to do global history, but today we're going to look at the Second World War. Yesterday I was doing the First World War, right? Now you know the change in the topics. Now, just like yesterday as well, yesterday, if you noticed, just before the I actually telling you about the First World War, I gave you details on what the political, economic, and military background was in the 19th century, especially of Europe, because obviously Europe was at the epicenter of the First World War, but not just restricted to Europe, also including some other countries. Similarly, I'm going to do that now, but since you guys do have an idea of how things worked out till the end of the First World War, which ended in 1918, you do have ample time. So now we can move straight away to understand the 1920s, because that will help you understand what happened. Why did we really have this Second World War immediately after the first? So basically, you all know, yesterday I concluded the story that Germany was defeated in the First World War. Now, because Germany lost in the First World War, there was much soul searching within the country. The people would gather around, they would discuss what exactly was it because of which they lost. Because Germany had a really proud military tradition, and the abject surrender right at the end, there were lots of conspiracy theories on why they sort of surrendered. So there were indeed a lot of this thing, but to identify the cause of the defeat. In addition to this defeat, there was also the financial burden of the Treaty of Versailles. I had told you last class that at the end of the Treaty of Versailles, the Treaty of Versailles was basically one which put all the blame of the First World War on Germany alone, which is why Germany saw this as a really unfair burden on themselves. There was a lot of money that had to be paid. Among the considerations as part of the Treaty of Versailles, let me tell you a couple of them. One of them was that Germany was not supposed to have an air force or a navy. It could have an army, but the army strength should not exceed 100,000 or 1 lakh, which is much less than the population of Germany would demand back then. There was this thing that the Ruhr Valley, which is very rich in coal and iron ore deposits. It's on the border with France. That needs to be demilitarized in order to prevent any future warfare. So on and so forth. There were many other such conditions, and of course, there was a massive amount of financial burden which had to be paid by Germany. Because of this, Germany was in a pretty bad state at this stage. So they needed sort of a radical leader. That's what the country had a demand during this period. But fortunately for the people of Germany, by the mid 1920s, the economy did start reviving thanks to major scientific and pharmaceutical innovation. Companies such as Bayer and BMW, they had already made inroads. Russia by now is a communist country. It is known as the USSR. So I'm looking at all the key belligerents of the Second World War. Russia, obviously, one of the most important ones. Little bit more into what happened during this period. The global economy was booming in the early and mid 1920s. And why is this? In fact, this period was known as the Roaring Twenties. This is because basically for several years, global trade and business had been depressed thanks to the horrors of the First World War. There was also the Spanish flu immediately after that, the global pandemic. But once it all settled down, hopefully we'll have a boom in a couple of years this time, even from now. But yes, going back to the precedent, post the pandemic and post the First World War, the 1920s was a period of much economic growth. There were a lot of new things that happened in the 20s. Hollywood, for example, US became this major movie producing country. Overall, USA emerged as a single biggest economic power. This is because European countries, which held sway before the war, the big three, which is Britain, France, and Germany, basically they killed each other because they had endless wars between each other. USA did participate in the war, but that was right at the end. Also, the US mainland did not see any warfare. And that again was something which acted as a benefit for the US. US troops also did not have to be stationed far off on remote areas of the world, which Britain and France did have that burden because of colonialism. During this period, while the European countries did remain areas countries with a lot of external colonies, but still there was mass discontentment thanks to the class system, which was truly exposed during the First World War. First World War, by the way, at this time was not known as the First World War. It was known simply as the Great War. The term was coined much later after the Second World War took place. So now there was a rising popularity of communism as an alternative political and economic system. And this is something which a lot of the ruling classes in the Western European countries did fear at this stage. Continuing on, Britain and France, although they remained strong imperial powers, they started facing upheavals in their colonies. Either it was armed rebellion in some countries, like some of the French colonies, or it was a peaceful movement, but one which involved, you know, scores of people, as happened in India. By now, Mahatma Gandhi was leading the Indian independence journey, and he had become he had returned from South Africa, and his methods were proving to be extremely successful in mobilizing masses of people. The Zionist movement, it hadn't yet reached its peak because obviously the Jewish question was not yet so important, but and that would in due course of time become something that would uh, sort of divide countries in a way. But right now, the Zionist movement was picking up. Palestine was obviously the old home of the Jewish people. So many of the Jews did yearn to eventually return back there. So there was a call for a separate Jewish nation. I think I had told you at the end of last class how after the First World War, Britain and France actually increased their territory. They divided a lot of the spoils of defeating these countries like Turkey and Germany. So, in fact, in the western part of the Gulf of the Middle Eastern region, Britain did occupy Palestine. Palestine and Jordan were both passed on to Britain, while Syria and Lebanon went to French hands. Now, during this period, the British did promise the Jewish community that they will be, Britain will help them create a new nation dedicated to Jews. So Britain has promised Jews a separate state. That leads to a mass repatriation of Jews from all over Europe to the Middle East, altering the local demographics. Now, this is critical because what has happened is with so many thousands of Jews migrating from Europe, even though we had not yet had the Holocaust, not yet had the Second World War, but even before that, there was mass migration into this area, which they claimed was traditionally theirs, and that upset the local demographic factors because obviously to counter the Jewish populations, the local populations were pretty much affected in that sense. So there was a sense of insecurity which was growing among some of the local population. Most of that area had been Muslim dominated for a long period of time. That, of course, would have several more problems after the Second World War, but now let's understand what happened during the wars. By the 1920s, Hitler did attempt a coup in Germany, but that failed. He always regarded Mussolini as his guru, even though eventually Hitler was far more successful in his political and definitely in his military achievements than Mussolini was. But right now, Mussolini was the first to set up a fascist regime. Japan also started a period of mass mobilization, especially of the navy, because Japan had now realized they had not been given the due respect after the First World War, either by the League of Nations or by any of the leading global powers like Britain, France, and USA. Japan saw itself as an equal of these countries, even though it wasn't European, it wasn't white. In that sense, it wasn't a traditional colonial power. So was their opportunity to show the world that Japan is right up there. The development of air force, that was an important thing among all the key belligerents, because belligerents are those who fight in a war. That's because obviously by now flying technology has become more common. In China, meanwhile, the nationalism did emerge after years of this system of ruled by the spheres of influence, which I had told you in yesterday's class. How China being so big, it wasn't possible for one country, one imperial country to dominate it. So there was this movement known as the cutting of the Chinese cake, also known as cutting of the Chinese melon, where China was divided into spheres of influence by the leading economic and political powers, leading imperial powers. All this started disappearing around this period. So by 1920s, Chinese nationalism was sort of back on track. The League of Nations, however, was proving to be toothless. Unlike the UN in later period, which has had quite a few successes, the League of Nations was quite unable to do much regarding the entire scope. Right. The 1920s actually ended with the catastrophic Great Depression, which was actually the worst economic crisis in recorded human history, if I look at the world together. So, what exactly happened in 1929? Let's understand. It was the worst economic crisis in recorded human history. So, I'm not getting down to the economics of it. That maybe for some other day we could understand what is a depression, what is a recession, terms like stagflation. We could all discuss all that. But just to understand, because this is more of a class on history, so this revealed the fallacies of the existing market-driven capitalist world. And as I told you, communism was becoming increasingly popular. So a lot of these Western countries saw communism as a massive threat to the powers of the entrenched classes, who generally tend to be close to the political establishment. So USA and Germany were among the biggest sufferers. There were some export driven economies such as Argentina and South Africa. They suffered severely with long term effects. In fact, some would say that Argentina is still suffering. Argentina in the 1920s was one of the world's richest countries. It was attracting more migration from Europe than even the US was. Yet, Argentina today is not so prominent a nation, this being one of the historical reasons. USSR, though, was extremely well shielded from all this crisis because it wasn't part of a market driven economy. So it was actually a communist or a socialist economy, and that is why USSR and communism won more admirers. These were the main groups involved in the Second World War. We'll talk about them in some time, but till then, there were the Allies, there were also the Axis. Who were the Allies? Let's take a look. Pretty much similar to who they were in the First World War. And in fact, I'm only talking of the major ones. मैं छोटे मोटे पे नहीं आ रहा. But in fact, if you look at the five key allies, these were actually the five founders of the United Nations. And in fact, they are the five permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. So Britain, obviously, now the moment I'm saying Britain, I'm also including all its dominions and colonies. For obvious reasons, India did contribute a lot in both the First and the Second World War. There was also Australia, New Zealand, Canada, South Africa. All of these had a major role to play as well. France, like Britain, was a massive colonial power with colonies all over the world, especially North Africa, West Africa, the Caribbean, Southeast Asia, yeah, also in the South Pacific. Then was Russia, which again one could call it USSR as well, because obviously by now the country was called USSR. This time they were better prepared for war than they were in the during the First World War. US, of course, so like the First World War, once again a sort of a late entrant, although they had to do a lot more fighting in the Second World War than they did in the first. Britain and France's case was slightly different because there was an ebb and flow to this war, unlike the First World War, which sort of stagnated. People kept dying on both sides, nothing really happened in terms of territorial gains. In the First World War, that was not the case. There was a lot of genuine uh, land gain, shall we say. China was also part of it. Wasn't that strong a country back then, but yes, Japan had invaded, so that's why China becomes important. Who are the Axis powers? Let us understand. Germany obviously leading the race, Italy being the other. I told you how Italy was the laughing stock in the two world wars. And once again, Italy did prove itself, not due to this alliance, but I'll show you later on. And of course, Japan, which proved to be equally, if not more powerful than Germany. Japan and Germany were pretty much the leading military powers of the time within the Axis group. Italy was sort of a supporter, but also the spiritual front. Okay, let's take a look at the names of some of the key leaders during the Second World War. Please take a look at these names. They're the most significant ones. Adolf Hitler, you know, was the leader of Germany, while Winston Churchill was the Prime Minister of Great Britain. He lost, interestingly, immediately after the Second World War to the Labour government, which was which was anti-imperialism and wanted decolonization. Although Churchill did come back to power after just one term out of it. I've told you about Mussolini, about Italy, and Mussolini was actually considered Hitler's guru. He was the prime minister from Italy, while Mr. Roosevelt was the president of USA. He was actually the only US president to complete 12 years, more than two terms, more than 8 terms as president. Meanwhile, Mr. Stalin was the premier from the USSR. Charles de Gaulle was the president of France, but in exile because I'll tell you why in some time. But France did lose a significant part of the war, so its leaders either had to comply with German terms or leave the country altogether. The second option is what Charles de Gaulle did. He rallied his troops from London itself. Right. There's also Hideki Tojo, who was the Prime Minister of Japan. Hirohito was the king back then, but Tojo was the one who used to handle the day-to-day affairs. Chiang Kai-shek, meanwhile, was the president of Nationalist China. I have put it within quotes because immediately during the Second World War, he was pretty much their champion. But after the war, there was this conflict known as the Chinese Revolution between the communists and the nationalists. So Chiang Kai-shek, that's why I've mentioned it in this term. Okay, I've done 1920s. Now you know the Second World War dates are 1939 to 1945, which is why right now I'm going to give you the background in the 1930s. So General Franco, in a relatively unrelated incident, because Spain was not a part of either of the wars officially, though they did send troops, but that was unofficially volunteer corps. They were not part of any of the alliances. Spain actually took the help of Italy in the Spanish Revolution. There was a Spanish Revolution where Franco was on the one side and the other side was another group. So Franco received help from Mussolini, who arranged for a strong air force to win Franco the war. Turkey did go through a period of mass modernization as well. There was this guy called Kamal Pasha Ataturk, who was one of the men leading this. revival in Turkey. Some of the leading imperial powers from Europe, like Britain, France, and the Netherlands, they started easing the polity in in the colonies. This actually started process of the local self governments. Right. Moving further on, I told you in Germany there was actually a triple whammy. I've told you about the Great Depression, which affected all the countries. There was also the World War, which has just ended, and the humiliating Treaty of Versailles. So Germany needed a revolutionary leader. Enter Adolf Hitler. He emerged as the most powerful leader after the election of 1933. That's when he first acquired power, though he did attempt a coup earlier, but his rise to power was completed in 1933. Now, Hitler's government embarked on a period of vilification of the Jewish minority. The Jews were sort of seen as scapegoats, as the people for whom the Germans lost the First World War. He also planned attacks on communists and other political rivals. Also, there was this concept of Aryan supremacy, whereby the white people, or the people of Europe, especially the northern Europeans, they were the Aryan people. Everybody else was inferior in one way or the other. So that was quite a racist school of thought. We're still at the background. Background builds up the story. Otherwise, we're nowhere. So now, by now, Hitler has become the chancellor or the president. He has started laying all the terms. So the first thing he does is he tells Britain and France that he's not going to comply with the Treaty of Versailles. Now, how did he disobey that? The formally disbanded Navy and Air Force were both restarted. The size of the army was increased beyond the permissible numbers, while the Ruhr Valley was militarized once again. US economy too started recovering after the horrors of the Great Depression. In 1933, Roosevelt became president. Roosevelt also introduced the New Deal, which basically took USA closer to economic revival. The European countries also likewise did come up in the economic ladder during this period. Some more of the background. Germany. So I told you how the various alliances were critical to the First World War. Not much changes, it seems, in 25 years' time. So there are more alliances which are formed. Germany forms one of them with Italy and Japan, known as the Axis. Japan did invade China officially in 1937, winning huge swaths of land in the process. You know how big China is. So obviously, Japan had to fight a brave war. USA, meanwhile, watches on everything without reacting. I told you USA used to follow this policy of non-intervention to foreign to other countries. USA continued doing that right now. Isolationism, as it is known as. So I told you how Hitler had been unfollowing all the norms laid down in the Treaty of Versailles. So initially, Britain and France are merely amused. They see Germany as yet another pretender. So they follow a policy of appeasement by which they were hoping that Germany does not push the world into another great war. That was the idea. One of the methods of appeasement, for instance, was 1936. The Olympics were hosted in Berlin, Germany. In fact, 1940 Olympics was supposed to be held in Tokyo, but they got delayed and eventually cancelled due to the war. Obviously, this year again, the Olympics in Tokyo got postponed. Although this year the reasons were different. Now, this is significant because Austria, just like Germany, is also a German speaking country. They share the same language and were part of the same country for several years, several centuries. In fact, Hitler himself was from Austria. While he got himself drafted into the German military, he was a national from Austria. So Germany started some of its, shall we say, digressions by occupying a. They always had a reason behind everything. So they actually started with the occupation of this region called the Sudetenland, which lies within Czechoslovakia. This was merely a pretext. After that, Hitler occupied the whole of Czechoslovakia. Also formed an alliance with Hungary, and covertly helped Franco, who was also a fascist in Spain, although not as openly did Hitler support Franco as Mussolini did. Now, this was probably the most shocking of the parts. Right in 1939, Germany had signed a pact with Russia or the USSR known as the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Even if one has given merely a cursory glance at Hitler's autobiography, which is Mein Kampf, which he wrote while in jail, even if one is barely to scratch on the surface, you will realize how the communist Russia and the fascist Germany were on two opposite scales of the political spectrum. So they were, in fact, also Hitler had extremely loathsome views on Slavs and Russians. So there's no way these two countries would have come together thanks to the racist or racial ideologies of the Nazis, Nazi party. That's what they were part of. Which is why this shocked everyone. But it seemed they were merely buying time, both these countries, because they both wanted to further develop their armaments. Britain and France, though, have had enough. They say that enough is enough. We are now going to issue an ultimatum to Germany. So they did do this ultimatum that one more transgression and war will be declared by these two nations. There's nothing that is to be done in this regard. And then finally, the trigger, the casus belli, was Germany's invasion of Poland on the 1st of September in 1939. This was followed 2 days later as part of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Russia too entered Poland and took up the rest of the country, which Germany vacated. Now, after this, there was a counter reaction. Britain and France declared war on Germany and Italy, and meanwhile, all the dominions also followed up shortly with similar declarations. In fact, if you analyze in terms of local timing, Canada was the first country to declare war on Germany and Italy. Little bit more on the start of the Second World War, how it started and what sort of a course did it take after that. So I told you Russia also invaded Poland, which is easily defeated by the joint might in just a couple of weeks. How much can Poland, fight on against these two massive military powers? Poland was thus partitioned between Germany and Russia. Russia also got a free hand while invading the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. They did threaten something very similar to Finland, although that could not eventually take place. Britain and France also considered declaring war on Russia because obviously Russia was a part of this pact. So they had, since this war was for the self-determination of Polish people, so Russia too should be equally blamed for this. But eventually they decided not to go against its double engine. Their belief was that Germany would lose pretty quick, maybe in 6 months' time. After that, we can focus our efforts on Russia. That, however, would not take place for a while now. Okay, now I told you how September 3rd is when the war was declared. But from that period, after the occupation of Poland, let's say beginning in October, right till April, there was almost no action due to the severe winter in Europe. You all know that winters are particularly harsh in Europe, which is why during this period, they took no war. This period is known as the phony war. I know this sounds a little funny, but the idea was that there wasn't really any war, but the key belligerents, they used up this time to build on their arms and ammunition. Right. So they all upped their war machines. The Jewish genocide, though, tragically begins in full earnest in Germany and some of the occupied areas or allies. Concentration camps were set up where large number of Jews are transported to eventually be killed during all these labor activities. Meanwhile, Germany sees rise, and more rise. Summer of 1942 is really good for Germany. There's this Prince method which is known as Blitzkrieg. Some of you may have heard. Blitzkrieg is a combination of the words Blitz, which is for speed, and Krieg is for warfare. So German Military formations were very quick, and within a matter of perhaps less than a month, Denmark, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands were all occupied. But they didn't stop at that. Even mighty France, one of the leading global powers, lost the war to Germany within just 3 weeks. Now, because France lost this war, so France's colonies also automatically passed on. So it had three colonies in Asia, the Indochina region, Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. All of these were now outsourced to Japan, because Japan is an ally of Germany. Norway too was occupied, while a friendly government was installed in Finland. Also in Denmark, that's why the Danish term Quisling is often used for several industries. Italy, continuing on the laughing stock criteria, they invaded Greece. In fact, if you guys want to read up this book, Captain Corelli's Mandolin, there's a movie as well starring John Travolta that pretty much talks about the German invasion or the Italian invasion of Greece, which Greece did repel, but Germany had to come in to the rescue of its ally. Germany also used a policy of divide and rule. We tend to think that divide and rule works well in India, but it also worked very well in European countries. How did that happen? For example, in Yugoslavia, there are multiple ethnicities. Just look at the map, any one of you. There are multiple ethnicities, but historically, and I told you how the country was formed and who was leading which movement, the Serbs had been the most powerful during this period. But what Germany did was they empowered the Croats, who had till now played second fiddle. So it is like sort of dividing the people in the name of language and ethnicity. In Czechoslovakia, likewise, the Czechs had been more dominant, but now the Slovaks are handed the real power centers, the institutions basically. Now there is only one country that stands between Hitler and complete domination of Europe, and that is an island nation, the nation of Great Britain. So this starts, however, the problem with Great Britain, as I said, is being an island nation. Not problem with that country. It's a problem for the invader. Is the fact that Britain is an island nation. So to subjugate the country, you first need to weaken the country enough so that landfall is relatively easier. It's never easy landing from a ship to land, because obviously you become soft targets during this landing. So Germany did sort of start its invasion through massive bombing raids over Great Britain. Military targets were targeted initially, but after that it was civilian and industrial areas that got targeted. I'll give you an example: the city of Coventry in the Midlands, which were West Midlands, which was a very important business hub, it's a manufacturing hub that was completely flattened by German bombing. However, some hiccups do emerge. So, till now, we've been speaking about how successful the German war machinery has been, but now suddenly we can see some sort of chinks emerge in the armory. So, what happened is, even though Germany did succeed in bombing Britain heavily, but somehow or the other, Britain survived. So, not going completely to plan, Britain survives in the air. And biggest achievement is Britain was able to prevent a landfall. If that had taken place, it would have been quite a different story. USA is now getting more and more involved, not directly in the fight, but yes, as a key lender to Britain. It is known as the Lend-Lease system, which does have its own critics, but of course, these were some of the gains as well. In North Africa, that is another corridor where Germany started losing ground. Britain gained the upper hand, pushing back the German invasion from Egypt. In fact, I would like to take name of two legendary military commanders. One of them uh, mm, being this person, George. Sorry, one of them was Rommel, Erwin Rommel, who was German. The other was Colin Montgomery, who was British. So Montgomery and Rommel, they had legendary rivalry between the two of them. And it's often said that each of them had the other's portrait in his room, so that from his bunker he could see the other man, and that would help him think what exactly is the other man thinking. And it was like it became like a chess game. That's how I will play. I told you how the French colonies in Southeast Asia were now outsourced to Germany, by Germany to Japan. Meanwhile, new frontiers emerged during this phase of the war. So by 1941, it had become certain that Britain is not going to bow down without a fight. So Germany as well as Japan, they both turned their interests elsewhere. So Germany broke its alliance with Russia, perhaps something which was long expected, and in the month of June invaded the country. In fact, initial few months were very successful for Germany on Soviet territory. Japan too invaded USA in December, thus bringing the conflict truly global. Till now, it had been mostly a European battle, but now the whole world gets involved. So USA has actually declares war. Okay, so that was about Germany. I told you Germany and Russia, and of course in Pearl Harbor, which is in Hawaii, that's a very important naval base. That's where Japan invaded. USA, meanwhile, obviously could have declared war on Japan, but it decided to declare war on all three together: Germany, Japan, and Italy. Germany initially did have it easy in Russia. By the summer of 1942, it is barely 12 miles from the city gates of Russia. Japan does likewise, has great success. That is just the trigger, that invasion of Pearl Harbor. But after that, island by island, territory by territory, Japan starts dominating China, large parts, and of course, Korea was already theirs. They also established a puppet government in Mongolia, and of course, got these Indochina countries transferred to them, but they also invaded and defeated the imperial powers in the Philippines, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, etc. But after some time, a reversal started, and that started with the iconic Battle of Stalingrad. This completely changed the scenario because the Germans. Okay, now if you look at the location of Stalingrad, basically the Germans had three divisions. One was moving north to St. Petersburg, one was through the middle to Moscow, and the other was going south to Stalingrad. Stalingrad, the importance is also not just the city or its location, also the fact that the word Stalin is mentioned. So in that way, in that sense, this became almost like symbolic for Stalin. um, it was deep inside the country. There are lots of conspiracy theories that Russia allowed Germany to come in, and so after a while they could not turn back. They were surrounded on every side, cut off. The supply lines were cut off, which carried food and other essentials of the winter. Russia, you know, is a very cold country. Stalingrad is actually a place which has a lot of oil. Fuel is one of the reasons why this place was so important. But now, of course, it is in the hands of the Russians have broken this massive German progress. I was telling you they had three columns. One was towards Saint Petersburg, the middle to Russia. The third one was actually to Kiev, the capital of Ukraine. Stalingrad is near that region, right? So Russia now gets momentum. I just told you about a couple of military generals from Germany and Britain. I'm also going to name two from Russia, Vasily Chuikov and Georgy Zhukov. These were two very important leaders who helped Russia get the momentum and that pushed back the columns of the German invaders. So US and Britain, meanwhile, they decided let's target Italy. That's the weak link in the team. So Italy's mainland was bombarded, and this bombing turned out to be enough. There was a landfall made as well by British, American, and Allied troops on northern Italy, but eventually that wasn't really needed much. Italy did surrender pretty soon by 1943. USA was also embarking on bombing raids on several islands of mainland Japan. So instead of attacking the islands which Japan now possessed, USA said, let's take the war straight to the home. So the Japanese mainland was mercilessly bombed as well. Japanese push on mainland China did see a glitch eventually because Although occupation of China is highly exciting, and of course Japan is such a big power, but the sheer challenge of geography, China being so large, very similar to the German invasion of Russia, the Japanese army would get lost in between the process. So the Chinese did get a lot of victories along this process. Russia, though, now moves further west. This defeat of Germany in Stalingrad has mobilized the Russians, or the Soviets, I should say. So they are moving towards Poland, Romania, and Bulgaria. I've used the word liberating within single quotes because whether they got liberated or not is a debatable matter, because they had to endure another 45 years of Soviet domination, communism, and Soviet domination. Um, but these were all eventually taken up from either German rule or German domination. Now, the end also started along this period. I'm really hoping that this thing is rather exciting, this entire topic. I always find World War II really exciting. Whenever I'm in stress, I like reading on these wars. Italy, as I told you, was the first to surrender, but North Africa is also now liberated primarily by Britain. Countries such as Egypt, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Morocco. The German influence there does not stay too long. Meanwhile, right at the southern tip of the planet, almost, there is this country called the Solomon Islands, where you have the Battle of Guadalcanal. There's a famous movie called The Thin Red Line, which was made on this particular movement. The Battle of Guadalcanal is often considered the Stalingrad moment on the Japanese theater. Just like for Germany, Stalingrad was the change. For Japan, it was Guadalcanal. So this changed the momentum in the Pacific too in favor of USA. By 1944, there's a third front which they have opened. So Germany is getting attacked from Russia, while Japan is sort of getting bombed from US. Now US and Britain and the other allies, the Canadians, the Australians, and also a lot of the exiles from Eastern Europe like Poland and Czech Republic. A lot of these guys, they together make landfall on the western coast of France, of the province of Normandy. Now, basically, Russia was doing pretty well. Russia by now would probably have, with some more reversal, but what this happened is this further broke the German military in the sense that there were some who had to take on the Russians, but many who now had to rush into the coast to protect this second front. So they were now under attack from two sides, plus also the air raids. Um, there's also another theory is that by now the Cold War had somewhat begun unofficially. So US realized that if they let Russia defeat Germany single-handedly, then we are not going to we're going to lose Western Europe completely to communism. So now is the time. Let's take our claim on Western Europe. So as I said, Germany now facing two frontier fight. British bombers also. So British bombers, they extract revenge. पहले Germans ने किया था. Now this is now couple of years the technology has moved further for stronger. So Britain now starts doing carpet bombing, which is far more destructive of the German cities. As I said, unofficially the Cold War had begun because now both these sides were competing to reach Berlin before the other does. In fact, a lot of the bombing was aimed specifically at destroying cities to rubble so that the Russians don't get much of the spoils of war. That's also one of the, I won't call it theory, it's something which is proven. The Japanese mainland, as I said, pummeled by American British bombing, but Japan was refusing to surrender. Eventually, Germany and Japan did surrender, and for that, a couple of major events had to give way. And of course, this was critical. By now, Hitler realized it's not going to work. There's this famous movie called The Downfall. It's a German movie. You can watch it in English if you want. So that actually shows the last few hours of Hitler. Now, Hitler on April 30th, 1945, commits suicide. In May, just 7 days later, 7th of May, Germany surrenders. And I think I discussed that event a couple of days back in one of the classes when we were discussing the Belarus case and how Belarus celebrated 7th May this year in the 75th anniversary we had this year. So after Germany is occupied by these sides, Germany is then partitioned between an American and a Soviet zone. Actually, four zones. American, British, French, and Soviet. But the American, British, and French are on the same side. They are all on one group within the Cold War. So basically, they merged their units, and the other is a Soviet zone. Japan, though, refuses to surrender in spite of heavy bombing. Had there not been nuclear bombs or atom bombs, I should call them, Japan would not yet have surrendered. It would have required landfall of Allied troops. So, on 6th of August, Hiroshima was pummeled, and 9th August, it was the case of Nagasaki. On 15th of August, finally, Japan did surrender. So, this brought an end to the war. I'll just call it atom bomb. I think that's a better word. Guys, do keep asking questions. Any questions you have on these? Okay, now what happened after the Second World War? Let's take a look because by now it was over. So, one very critical matter was economics. We've been speaking about military and politics, but also on the economic side, there were a couple of changes which uh, do require some attention. So this was the Bretton Woods system. Bretton Woods is a part of Washington D.C. and that comprises the World Bank. The both these institutions are located there. That's why it's known as the Bretton Woods system. Now the U.S. dollar replaced the British pound as the principal currency in the world, and also the process of decolonization had begun. Started with the independence of India, and also several other countries from British or other European rule. India was the first, and after that, several others started getting independence one by one. Malaysia, for instance, just 10 years after India's. One of the great legacies of the Second World War, and that unfortunately has not yet been completely resolved, although very recently we did see a couple of some sort of improvement with the Abraham Accords. There was this Arab-Israeli conflict which emerged as a straight-up consequence of the war. Now, Israel was established to placate the Jewish community, which now was facing a wave of international sympathy thanks to the Holocaust, where about 6 million Jews were killed. This is something which took place in Europe. And of course, the Cold War also begun with ideological competition between the two camps, one led by the USSR, that was communist, the other was economically capitalist, as led by USA. So that pretty much sums up my class. If you have any questions, do feel free to ask. Oh, sorry, there was one more point. The United Nations now formed with a view to ensure no future wars. There have been lots of wars in the last 70 odd years, but the UN has been one of the great forces in ensuring that nothing has spiraled completely out of control. Right, so this is our channel. Let's crack management exams. You know the drill. Do like, share, comment, and subscribe. You may use my code AD09, and that will give you a 10% discount. I'm keeping this session open for a couple of minutes. In case of any questions which arise from your side, please feel free to ask, and then I will pretty much wrap it up. Let me see for the questions. Fair enough. I think I have been able to solve your questions and queries for now. So I think we can wrap up the session. Thank you so much. Was wonderful interacting with all of you guys. So see you all very soon. And yes, please have a wonderful Diwali, wonderful but safe Diwali. Right? I think you know the drill as it is. So do have a great time in this. Thank you so much, guys.